Hello and welcome to Maximum Evanescence, the first talking book about the band. It was written and researched by Ben Graham, music is by Amanda Thompson and it's read by Nancy McLean. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
Well, the band itself is Amy and I. We write everything, and we have a live band that includes another guitar player and a drummer, and we also have, a road crew that handles our electronics and technical matters on the road.
The sense of expectation is mounting. The audience stare at the darkened stage, waiting for the band to appear. One by one, hesitantly at first, they begin to chant a name. As more join in, the crowd becomes increasingly confident, and the chant rises to a roar as feet stamp against the floor and the auditorium vibrates to the rhythm of the two-syllable word they're repeating, over and over again. It is a name, but not the name of the band. It is a female name, a Christian name, the name of the lead singer. Amy, Amy. It echoes even backstage, translated to a dull and distant cacophony, as the band prepare finally to reveal themselves to the baying hordes. They exchange glances, not of surprise, or confusion, or even of annoyance, but simply of world-weary resignation. They have heard this chant before. In other cities, in other towns, in other theatres and arenas, on the seemingly never-ending world tour they've been engaged in ever since they became famous. Whatever that means, they wonder, as they take in the army of technicians, road crew, extra musicians, press and record company people that surrounds them now, at all times. It's certainly a long way from Little Rock, Arkansas, they may reflect, as the lights dim and the chanting out front suddenly explodes into a celebratory cheer. Back then, they were officially unknown, but at least those people who did know them acknowledged them as a band. Sure, sometimes they were that band with a chick singer, but usually it was only disinterested parties and the terminally unhip who called them that. To everyone else, they were simply Evanescence. Who were Evanescence now? They were the band with that song, from the hit movie soundtrack, the song that got them compared to Linkin Park because of the rap rock vocal, added as an afterthought in a spare half hour by a guest singer who'd never even performed live with the group. They were the saviours of nu metal, whatever that was, a genre they'd never asked to be associated with in the first place. Depending on who you asked, they were either sinister Christian evangelists or servants of the Antichrist, doom-obsessed serious artists, or manufactured pop-pap. They were suddenly one of the biggest bands in the world, yet everyone expected them to have vanished into the ether by tomorrow, as their name suggested. And, still more than ever, they were that band with a chick singer, Amy Lee, lead vocalist and co-founder, and unwitting sex symbol to millions. Unbelievably, for a group thought of as being an overnight sensation, Amy had founded Evanescence with Ben Moody almost a decade earlier. True, they were both barely into their teens at the time, and the number of shows that they'd played prior to their current tour could probably be counted on the fingers of one hand. Success had happened slowly and then suddenly, and no one could say that they hadn't had plenty of time to prepare for it. They knew who they were as a band and as people. They were grounded and had a strong sense of their own identity. It was the rest of the world that was going to have to catch up. The lights flash back on. The band are on stage. The cheering becomes ecstatic, almost hysterical, and the guitarists grin over at each other as they slam into a pulverizing heavy metal riff, the drums pounding away behind them as, up front, Amy Lee dances herself into the spaces between the music. When she begins to sing, it's in the voice of an angel soaring over the flames of hell, a voice that mingles innocence with loss, optimism with deep regret, strength with surrender, salvation with damnation. It's a voice that, ultimately, is what sets Evanescence apart from their peers, and deep down, the band know it. They know that Amy is bound to be the centre of attention, not just for her gender or her appearance, but for her talent. That, after all, is why Ben has been working with her for so long. and one of the reasons why the others are just grateful to be aboard. So they play. They play the songs they wrote a year ago, and the songs they wrote 5 years ago, the songs they have dedicated their young lives to. And an hour or so later, they leave the audience thrilled, sated, and a little better acquainted with what Evanescence are all about. They know now that there's more to them than just a pretty face, a soaring vocal, and another kick-ass radio anthem. That there's a band of substance and of subtlety, of raging extremes, of passion and commitment. The name of the band is Evanescence, and this time, it's one that they're unlikely to forget.
We met when I was in 7th grade or something and started writing music together.
Yeah.
So
actually, one of the songs in the Daredevil soundtrack, we finished when we were 15.
The ballad that's on there.
We were 15, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas is a hard-working, God-fearing state, perhaps best known in recent times for giving us the only Democrat president of the United States of America of the last 20 years. But, Bill Clinton aside, this southern state, right in the heart of what is popularly referred to as the Bible Belt, has made little contribution towards world culture, politics, arts, or entertainment. This is perhaps not to be unduly held against it. After all, as far as states go, Arkansas is tiny. Roughly 1 million people call it home, and half of those reside in Little Rock, its capital. A village by most standards, Little Rock is nevertheless proud to be Arkansas's principal city, the place where everything happens. Like many things down here, it's all a question of perspective. For the kids growing up there in the 1990s, Little Rock certainly lived up to its name. There was Little Rock, and even less roll in the city, where everyone knew your name and knew where your parents lived. Where there was a church on every corner, and only one bar come pizza parlour, Vino's, that gave even a passing nod to what might be called alternative culture. Otherwise, you could join the local jocks in getting drunk, tripping over sleeping cows, and making out with the school cheerleaders to the age-old riffs of Leonard Skinner and ZZ Top. Or you could join the church youth group and get to travel around and interact with other young people under the watchful eye of adult authority. Either path led to the same eventual destination, conformity, an early marriage, and a steady job with a local firm, wild oats long since sowed. But what if you wanted something more? What if you were young and disaffected with the safe, suffocating adult culture you saw around you? What if the scent of hypocrisy and slow desperation made you feel alienated and alone, and some artistic impulse inside that they'd been unable to stifle told you that you were different? How to express your creativity and uniqueness when it was hard enough to avoid getting beaten up and ostracized if you looked just a little bit weird? The staid social establishment of Little Rock naturally bred its fair share of goths, metalheads, stoners and freaks, who were all out to rebel against the tight-knit community around them. Some drifted into drugs, despair and petty crime, and lost their way completely. But others turned their adolescent energies to something more creative. They wrote, they painted, and they formed bands. Ben Moody and Amy Lee first met at a church-run summer camp in rural Arkansas in 1994. He was 14, performing there with a local praise and worship group, while she was a regular camper, 13, and just moved to the state with her family from Illinois. Shy, awkward, and insecure, she was also a precocious talent, inward-looking and self-reliant, yet at the same time a frustrated exhibitionist. Moody recalls that he first saw and heard her during a particularly dull and dreary basketball game in the camp gymnasium. He was sat, bored to tears, watching the game, when he suddenly became aware of someone playing the piano, set on the small stage beside the gym floor. It was Amy, performing a particularly soulful and note-perfect rendition of Meat Loaf's complex classic of pop rock kitsch, "I Would Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That." Captivated, Moody ran straight over and introduced himself. They got to talking about music, art and so on, and discovered that they had similar tastes. Ben too was a musician, a guitarist, but he'd never before found anyone that he could really communicate his ideas to, let alone envisage collaborating with. But soon he and Amy found themselves working out songs together. Whilst demonstrating the chords to a Smashing Pumpkins tune, Amy sang the melody to Ben. It was the first time he had heard her sing, and it was another epiphany. Amy's voice was amazing, and Ben knew that this was the person he'd been looking for. Half-jokingly, he recalls that he quickly made her promise never to work with anyone else. She was all his, and with that, a beautiful partnership commenced.
Ben and I just wrote music for like 7 years. I mean, we actually just didn't try to get a record deal for a good like 5 or 6 years. But more than anything, we just like sat in Ben's apartment, me in the closet doing vocals, just like recording and writing and making yourselves better, and getting the whole band established.
Ben and Amy didn't instantly form Evanescence, but they did almost immediately begin writing and playing songs together, and gradually developed a shared vision of what they wanted their music to sound like. Their joint influences and inspirations included Nirvana, Nine Inch Nails, Korn, Björk, Radiohead, Sting, Portishead, Type O Negative and Tori Amos. But the artist they were most enthused about, who they most wished to emulate and maybe work with one day, was the film's soundtrack composer, Danny Elfman. Elfman is best known for his work with director Tim Burton, whose eccentric, individual and darkly humorous films owe much of their eerie atmosphere to Elfman's unique scores. Quirky, unsettling, epic and emotionally uplifting without being corny, Elfman's music to accompany films such as The Nightmare Before Christmas, Batman and Edward Scissorhands represent a form of contemporary orchestral gothic that struck a distinctly moody minor chord in Ben and Amy's hearts. Like many others, they also enjoyed his work with cult alternative rock group Oingo Boingo, whose fans had also included the young Kurt Cobain. The cinematic and orchestral sweep of Elfman's work, with its beguiling darkness, was central to the music Ben and Amy saw themselves making. Artists like Portishead and Enigma suggested ways that this music could be fused with hip-hop beats and electronic rhythms without losing its lush, elegiac atmosphere. If they could then fuse this with the gothic rock and heavy metal that was their first love, while maintaining the complex and sophisticated level of songwriting that Amy was developing at the piano, topped with her otherworldly vocals, well, then they'd really be onto something. From the beginning, Evanescence set out to combine aggression and power with beauty and introspection, to create dark, heavy rock that nevertheless conveyed a positive message of hope. Their name means a dissipation, something fleeting and vanishing, dispersing like a vapour. It's also right next to evangelism in the dictionary, which may or may not be a coincidence, as Ben and Amy's shared Christian faith was also an important element in their conception of the band. Ben in particular was a committed Christian who had thought long and hard about his spiritual beliefs. "We're just sick of being bombarded with catchy riffs that have no depth or meaning behind them," he told Stranger Things magazine in 1999, shortly after the release of their debut EP. The message we as a band want to convey more than anything is simple: God is love. He went on to say how he felt that bigotry and intolerance amongst people who called themselves Christians created more atheists than anything else, and how he personally felt God was non-judgmental. "We hope to express in our music that Christianity is not a rigid list of rules to follow," he said. "All of our songs are not about rainbows and sunshine. Sometimes it rains. Who can we help if we won't even talk about it? No one is alone." Ben and Amy were spurred on by their competitive instincts. Whenever one would write a song that they were particularly proud of, the other would try to better it. Eventually, they realised that they had enough good material to form a band. Initially, though, other members recruited never seemed to last. They came on board and then just as quickly departed, unable to share the core duo's vision or penetrate their insular creative partnership. So they wrote and recorded their songs themselves, overdubbing all the parts, with Ben playing guitars and drums, as well as programming the electronic parts, while Amy sang and played piano and keyboards. And, very occasionally, they would venture out live, hiring local musicians from Arkansas's burgeoning Christian rock and metal scene to accompany them for the night. Then, like their name suggested, they would fade away once more, dispersing silently back into the night.
That other stuff was done in our home, just locally, just to kind of get a buzz around our hometown. We had to leave because there's only, there's
only so much room.
Yeah, people don't know. I mean, this isn't very common around here. Like for bands to put, most of it is heavy metal.
Well, and there's not a lot of bands from here because it's just a small place. I mean, and I'm from all over, and we're just sort of different, open-minded people, I guess.
Evanescence released their first EP in December 1998 at a show they played at Vino's Rock Club and Pizza Parlour. Little more than a demo, it was limited to 100 CDRs, although backed by local indie label Bigwig Enterprises. It sold out that same night. The Evanescence EP, as it was known, consisted of 7 songs, all written and performed by Ben and Amy, although the song Solitude featured William Boyd on bass, rhythm guitar and backing vocals, along with Matt Outlaw on drums, while the song Understanding featured drummer Rocky Gray, then in Christian death metal band Soul Embraced. The band reworked Understanding for their second EP, variously known as Whisper or Sound Asleep, both songs featured on the CD, and released in 1999. Another CDR, this time limited to just 50 copies, it showcased a variety of different styles: acoustic, goth, electronica, and atmospheric metal. Despite its limited release, the EP nevertheless began to receive airplay on local radio station KABF Little Rock. DJ Brad Cavinus had given Understanding a spin at something like 3 a.m. and was astonished to be inundated with calls from Arkansas's night people demanding to know what it was, who it was by, and to hear it again. Soon, that song and Give Unto Me, Sound Asleep, were virtually on heavy rotation, and everyone was talking about the mysterious enigma of Evanescence, this huge local band who no one knew and who hardly ever played live. The band themselves describe Understanding as this ridiculous 7-minute goth anthem that was actually only the second song they wrote together. A plea to recognise and accept the pain and loneliness we must all go through in life, it obviously resonated deeply with many, as did Give Unto Me, with its offer to carry a loved one's burden for them. The Evanescence EP also featured an early version of Imaginary that the band would later rewrite and re-record for the Fallen album. It was around this time that Evanescence expanded to a trio, as David Hodges joined on keyboards as a full-time member. Ben, a notorious perfectionist, found it almost impossible to collaborate with anyone, but at the time he said that David was probably the only other person besides Amy that I could work with musically in this band. The remainder of 1999 was spent in building their own studio in Ben's basement, and it was here that the band recorded their first album, 2000's Origin. Origin was released on November 4th, 2000, at a show at Little Rock's River Market Pavilion. Its 11 tracks included Where Will You Go from the first EP, as well as new versions of Whisper, Imaginary, and My Immortal. Again released on Bigwig Enterprises, it soon sold out. The band's popularity was actually boosted enormously by their enigmatic status, although this was accidental. It was because we could never afford to play a show, Ben later recalled. Evanescence may well have remained a local phenomenon, however, if producer Pete Matthews hadn't overheard Origin while Ben was mixing it at a professional studio in Memphis, Tennessee. He stuck his head round the door and asked if he could take a copy with him as he was going to New York and Los Angeles next month to meet with record companies. Evanescence agreed and soon forgot all about it, until, a few months later, they received a call from Wind Up Records, an imprint of the Sony Corporation and best known for the huge success of Christian rock band Creed. They began negotiations, and other labels, seeing that Wind Up was interested, also began offering the band deals. But Evanescence stuck with the first to show faith, and by the beginning of 2001, they had signed with Wind Up and relocated to Los Angeles. There, they assumed, to begin immediate work on their debut album proper. But this was not to happen so easily.